Resting? I shouted at the top of my voice. Dying, more likely. One never leaves a Mamba bite patient alone, and certainly not before giving him the required dose of serum. These are true tales of my African adventures. May this inspire you, deter you, caution you, and above all, entertain you. Johann was such a nice man, a keen photographer. He loved hiking, the outdoors in general, and was fond of all creatures. He came from the Karoo and spoke fondly of his early days in that special landscape that covers a significant part of South Africa. In particular, he spoke of the mountains in the region where he had been raised and said there was a black leopard in these mountains that he would one day photograph. Before long, we were sharing an apartment in Yeovil. This was a 2-bedroomed affair with bathroom, kitchen, and a modest dining room. Most weekends we headed out of Johannesburg as far as we could manage and spent our time hiking. Johann photographing anything that moved and the endless scenery, generally indulging in a healthy, wholesome 2 days. Johann was raised Afrikaans, but spoke English well. I in turn could speak Afrikaans acceptably well. The first premonition came one unexpected Sunday morning. Jehovah's Witnesses would prowl the suburbs and apartment lands looking for likely converts. There was a knock on the door and I beheld a lady and a gent, Jehovah's Witnesses, wishing to speak with us. I was philosophically inclined and would entertain any discussion regarding the esoteric, no matter the angle it was presented from. Some way into the conversation, Johann suddenly blurted out a question which he had been deeply contemplating, apparently unaware of the nature of the gentle argument between myself and the Jehovah's Witnesses. "Can you tell me what happens when you die?" he asked out of the blue. We stopped in our verbal tracks. They attempted a lame response, but he was unconvinced. They promised to seek a more definitive answer from their superiors and would return in 3 weeks with the appropriate information. That suited us fine, as we had planned outings for the next 2 weeks. Friday was upon us and we packed our tent, clothing, equipment, and headed off. Our destination was some remote place near Ellisras. Late on Saturday, I suggested we camp in a pass on the old Ellisras road. There were some beautiful cliffs on the one side of the pass and a magnificent broad stream running at the foot of the cliff, well wooded, with sandy beaches and vibrating with life. We set up camp on a sandy beach under some overhanging branches. The day now nearing a close, we decided to take a dip in the river in our costumes, then climb up the cliff, ascending from ledge to ledge, which stepped all the way up to the top of the cliff. The cliff faced the setting sun. Johann was, as usual, armed with his camera, and the scenery was excellent for him to photograph. While we were sitting on a wide ledge near the top, an unmistakable sound grew louder and louder as the fast-moving body of a large snake came directly towards us through the dead leaves and grass. The snake had not seen us yet and was on his way home after a day of hunting. As it passed near us, I laid eyes on a gigantic black mamba. I hadn't seen such a big one before. One should not be capturing a mamba in a bathing costume and without any equipment. But what the heck? I wasn't letting this prize off lightly. I snatched at its tail and succeeded in fixing my hand on the last 30 centimeters of its massive body. The snake was around 4 meters long in my estimation. The capture was far from easy. It turned on me immediately and I had to dodge its strikes. Its strikes were at my legs and mid-body, Several times it came, again and again. I managed to back up a section of cliff to escape his repeated retaliatory attacks. Johann, in the meantime, now had worthy cause to make good use of his camera. The photo you see reveals the situation I was in without further explanation being necessary. Down we climbed, carrying our prize proudly. It is a strange phenomenon, this human conquest over lesser creatures, one I have contemplated for many years. We returned to Johannesburg. This most incredible specimen was temporarily housed at a friend's home in Pretoria, in a suitable enclosure in the outhouse of his parents' premises. My Pretoria friend's mother was to feature on the final stage of Johann's short life. Encouraged by the weekend, we briefed all of those who were to accompany us on our next outing, to the same location, of course. Jumbo, his nickname, my friend from the days in the military, was to accompany us. He was one of the dedicated trainees who had joined me for extra physical training during our basics. He was training to be a mechanic at this stage, a tall man, 6'6" or 6'7", and as strong as an ox. Other members of the party were my older brother Charles, my younger brother Stuart, and of course, again, Johann. We were to use Charles's V8 Ranchero truck to transport us and our equipment to our destination. 2 days before the weekend, the Ranchero developed engine trouble. Jumbo came to the rescue, or almost rescue, but despite his best efforts, couldn't repair the engine in time. My own vehicle was out of commission, so Johann suggested we use his vehicle, even though we and our equipment would hardly fit. Friday was once again upon us, and we embarked on our expedition at a snail pace in the overloaded vehicle, picking up Jumbo on our way through Pretoria. Later that evening, we had progressed well when beyond Faalwater one of the tyres developed a puncture. It was now late and chilly. We made a fire at the side of the road. Johann had no spare tyre. My brother Charles, against all odds, waved down a vehicle driven by a local farmer who happily took brother and flat tyre to his farm, repaired the tyre, and brought him back to the stranded party. Such generosity of nature. We were off again, now near midnight. Probably 50 kilometers or so later, another tyre developed a puncture. At this stage, we should have read the message the gods were sending us. Stubborn, we would not accept defeat. We slept it out, and the following morning Charles again waved a car down. A tyre was repaired at a garage in the local town, and he secured a lift back to our party once again. Finally, we reached our destination. Tired but successful, we sprang into action, setting up camp and exploring the surroundings. It was a good time. The day was fruitful, filled with vigor, exploration, and the capture of some fine specimens. Johann photographed away to his heart's content. The Mamba was caught in the following manner. Charles headed straight up the cliff, heading for the ledge where Johann and I had bagged the giant Mamba the week before, hoping to repeat the event. He was lean, nimble, and strong, and was up in a jiffy. Suddenly shouting for our attention, he had a Mamba before he had even reached the upper ledge of the cliff. In a minute he had the reptile in a firm grip and was on his way down. We all admired his captive and helped place the Mamba into a cotton bag. Placing a Mamba in a bag is not as straightforward as it sounds. One thrusts one's hand and arm into the bag to the bottom. The grip on the Mamba's head is then transferred to the hand inside the bag. Once the head is firmly held within the bag is pulled back over the snake, so the snake is now in the bag and the hand on the outside. One then loops the balance of the body into the bag. Before letting go of the head, a secure knot is tied in the bag. The bag is then held above the knot and the head let go of quickly. Now watch out. Snakes bite through bags, and a number of handlers and catchers have met a sticky end through a bag. I personally had a close call when a bag brushing against my leg left me with 2 small blood stains on my trousers. A large spitting cobra had taken the opportunity to sink his fangs into me. Thankfully, almost all the venom in this case had been absorbed by the cloth snake bag and my trousers, leaving me with mild local symptoms. Usually we placed a bag with a dangerous snake such as a mamba into a tin or box to prevent such an accident. On this outing, destiny's hour was drawing to a conclusion, all the while escaping our attention. All our tins and boxes now had captives in. I decided to place the mamba in the boot under a pair of thick jeans, Johann's jeans. He would only need these on Sunday, and I would hand him his jeans, being general custodian of the dangerous reptiles. That evening we ate well, cooking on an open fire, using flat rocks on the coals as hot plates. Presently we all fell into a deep sleep around the fire, leaving the day and previous night's difficulties far behind us. I don't recall much about the Sunday morning. I know we were up early, had a bite, and began our movement into the bush. Somewhere around early afternoon the day was over, and we broke camp and began to pack and prepare for the home run. We changed from our bush clothes into our last clean clothing. Johann came to me at the appropriate time and asked for his jeans, which he well knew, and we all well knew, were lying on top of the mamba. I obliged, opened the boot, and retrieved his jeans and handed them to him personally. We were all changing into our clothing and putting final touches to our packing and tidying. I was at the bonnet of the car still changing when Johann's cry split the still bushveld air. "The mamba has bitten me," he screamed in a desperate, panicked and high-pitched voice. I dropped everything and almost leapt the entire distance to the rear, where Johann was staggering backwards, holding his right hand with his left. He was staring disbelievingly at the fang punctures on his inner hand below his thumb. I too was staring at the exact spot in utter disbelief. "What the hell were you doing in the boot?" I shouted. "Getting my jeans," he replied. I had given the jeans to him a few minutes before, and he was now wearing them. It seems I had interrupted destiny, and so she caused a replay to thwart my unwitting intervention of the flow of events. It seems that after putting on his jeans, some force drove him back to the boot in an attempt to retrieve his jeans, which he was, as I have said, already wearing. Alas, the jeans were of course not there. He clutched at the bag where his jeans had been, a completely inexplicable action. The mamba needed no further prompting, and with Johann's hand on the bag, the large snake plunged its fangs deep into his hand, injecting an enormous amount of venom. All those premonitions, from the Jehovah's Witnesses to the obstacles placed before us, had now turned into an unreal reality. The event was now transferred onto the stage of life, and we were the unwitting audience. Well, if you think this is dramatic and fanciful, please give me a better explanation. The effects of the venom were devastating. This robust, healthy, fit man in his early prime went down within a few minutes. We broke open the 2 serum kits we had. Not sufficient to treat a mamba bite fully, but enough to delay the effects until we reached real help. Actually, we were just young adventurers who had placed ourselves in a position beyond our capabilities. I suppose this is the nature of adventure, and is why adventure is so dangerous. The events to follow were staggering. We placed Johan in the back seat and drove towards the nearest help, my old military base. I knew they had oxygen there, and we needed oxygen to prevent asphyxiation when the venom interrupted his breathing after our serum was depleted. An ambulance would also be available. I found his vein and inserted the needle. I was in the vein. I did not remove the needle after that, but simply removed each empty syringe and inserted the next into the needle, still in his vein. His recovery was remarkable each time 10 cc's of serum were injected into him, but finally the last ampule had been used. After this he lapsed into semi-consciousness and started vomiting, defecating and urinating involuntarily. We reached the military base, but the medical facility had been somewhat downgraded and there were no qualified staff. All they could produce was an oxygen cylinder and a mask. This was not the help we needed. We needed oxygen in his lungs, not at his nostrils. The local ambulance arrived. Johan was bundled in and raced off to the nearest town. We followed in Johan's car, arriving after the ambulance. I ran into the hospital. "Where is Johan?" I demanded. The nurse pointed me in the direction of the ward and the bed. "Don't worry," she said. "The doctor gave him an ampule of serum and left him resting." "Resting?" I shouted at the top of my voice. "Dying, more likely. One never leaves a mamba bite patient alone, and certainly not before giving him the required dose of serum." I was incensed. "An ampule," I shouted again. "He needs another 6 or 8 at least." I burst into the room and stopped in my tracks. Johan was lamely pointing at an imaginary vision and mumbling weakly. He was pointing at the mountain near his home, where he was to photograph his black leopard. He was clearly dying. Just turn it off a sec. I called for the doctor, life support, serum, any emergency intervention I could think of. I was, however, subdued by the staff. The doctor, as I later found out, wanted to move this difficult case to Pretoria, thereby sentencing him to a certain death, as there was no hope of him surviving the journey. I was just too young and inexperienced to intervene in a meaningful way. Johan was once again placed in the ambulance with a young nurse and no life support. I forced my way in. "I'm going with him," I insisted. The door shut and we left at breakneck speed. I asked the nurse to find his pulse as he looked dead. She could not find a pulse. I started heart massage like a man possessed. "He has a slight pulse now," she said. "Give him mouth to mouth," I instructed. Both she and I continued for at least an hour. I remember the ambulance nearly losing control as it crossed the Apis River. The staff at the hospital in Pretoria were waiting. They rushed Johan into the emergency area and I followed on, exhausted. After a short while, a rather callous, uninterested nursing sister approached me and simply said, "He is dead. Probably died in the ambulance," and walked off. I waited outside until the car arrived. We drove to Jumbo's home. Our prize Mamba was there and our new captive in the boot. We were no longer so proud of our pursuits. Jumbo's mother was going to be the first to hear of the event. We parked and walked into the house. It was quite late, and strangely enough, the door was open. Jumbo's mother was waiting for us. This was unusual. We filed into the room. Before we could utter a word from our broken spirit, she exclaimed, "You don't have to tell me. Johan was here earlier." Johan was here earlier? We stared at her in utter disbelief. "Yes," she said. "He told me he had died and what had happened, but he was happy. He wanted to go to the outhouse, and he spent some time there watching the big mamba, the one we had caught the week before. He was there for 20 or 30 minutes. He acknowledged her, then he left. He is okay, quite happy," she said. His family visited me some years later. They felt my discomfort, still feeling guilty for his death. It was a brief visit. They were more gracious than they needed to be. I did not tell them about the premonitions or about the clairvoyant. At the time, I simply could not. I was back in the apartment after the weekend's events. It was now the third weekend. Alone in the apartment, there was a knock at the door on the Sunday morning. I opened the door. The Jehovah's Witnesses were there. As promised, smiling, they announced they now had an answer for Johan. "Too late," I said. "He's dead."